YouTube frogs, welcome to my all-in-one guide on Navia, covering everything you need to know about our favorite gunbrella using girl boss, Taylor Swift. Breathing new life into the Geo element as an attack scaler and utilizing a 3-year-old forgotten reaction, Navia adds a super strong, easy to use, and fun twist to Genshin Impact. In this video, we'll be going through her talent set, constellations and their impact on our gameplay, best choices for weapons and artifact setups, recommended stats to have, and team synergies available to her. Let's begin. Talents. So Navia's core gameplay revolves around her elemental skills Gunbrella Shotgun damage. This damage increases depending on the number of crystal shrapnel stacks she consumes, and these come from shards produced by the crystallized reaction. Any party member on your team can collect them, does not have to be Navia herself. Her elemental skill has a tap form, which has auto target on the nearest enemy, and a hold form that vacuums in nearby shards and allows you to aim the ability before dealing damage. This is how her elemental skill damage increases depending on stacks. At 0 charges, her E fires the minimum shard shots, 5, and deals the base multiplier in her skill description. 1, 2, and 3 charges increases the shard shot to 7, 9, and 11 respectively, and at 11 shard shots, her E will deal 2 times her base multiplier damage. Anything in between will deal a proportional between 100 to 200% of her base multiplier. Stacks 4, 5, and 6 further increase her E damage, but no longer affect the base multiplier. Instead, they grant damage bonus similar to a goblet. She'll gain 15% damage bonus for each stack past 3, capping at 45%. This is much easier to see in chart form, so if how I'm explaining it is a little confusing, pause the video for a visual explanation. For the most value out of her kit, you really want to aim for at least 3 shrapnel stacks. This boosts her base multiplier value to the maximum, which scales into all other stats including attack, crit damage, and damage bonus. Stacks 4 to 6 are less necessary at C0, which provide damage bonus and are affected by diminishing returns from artifacts, weapons, and other characters like Farina's damage bonus. This obviously depends on the number of crystallized reactions you can produce with your team in a short amount of time. If you can easily produce 6 shards per her E, then you'll have max E every time. Additional notes from her E, cooldown is 9 seconds and she can hold up to 2 charges. Particle generation is 3.5 per, 50% chance at 3 or 4 particles, averaging out to 1 per 2.5 seconds, accounting for her cooldown, which is the usual. Her E also contains the Arca alignment, which is Usia on a 7-second cooldown. Now, after you fire her E, her A1 passive activates. This grants her Geo Infusion to normal charge plunging attacks for 4 seconds that cannot be overridden, and those attacks will gain a 40% additional damage bonus. This window is the only practical time for her normal attack talent usage, which does deal extra damage given she's an attack scaler, but the main usage is to generate more crystallized shards within this 4-second window for her next E. Since her E has 2 charges, but you want at least 3 to 6 shrapnel stacks before using one, this window gives you a necessary opportunity to squeeze more shards out with her infusion. Elemental Burst. Navia gets her cannons out and fires a barrage of attacks that deal AoE geo damage periodically to enemies around her. The cannon fire support that happens after initial cast follows the active character even if it's not Navia herself. Her burst also grants Navia a stack of crystal shrapnel independent of those gained from the crystallized shards. So this ability is mostly utility to help further stack Navia's shrapnel while also dealing a decent bit of extra geo damage. Additional notes, burst cost is 60 with a cooldown of 15 seconds, and the duration is 12 seconds for an 80% uptime. Finally, her Ascension 4 passive. For each Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro party member, Navia gains 20% increased attack, stacking up to 2 times for 40% attack total. It's a pretty free buff. She's not great in Mono Geo because she needs crystallized shards, so 40% attack is basically for free. This does not have to be unique elements, by the way. It can just be 2 of the same type, for example, 2 Pyro for the full buff. Now onto her playstyle. So Navia is pretty flexible in what she can do with the combination of her 2 charge E and then normal attack infusion. Using the full combination of her kit in this way means that she can be on field anywhere between 5 to 14 seconds. E into 4-second normal attack into E is the shortest output, which is roughly 5 seconds, using both of her charges with minimal A1 passive to generate enough crystallized shards for 3 to 6 stack E's. This can be extended by another 4 seconds after the second E if you choose to normal attack with her second infusion. This short window of 5 to 9 seconds can only be produced once every 18 seconds when she has both charges. This can be lengthened to include a third E that looks like follows. E into 4-second normal attack, into E into 4-second normal attack, after which point 9 seconds have passed, refreshing 1 E charge, and then an optional 4-second normal attack. This is a lot more front-loaded and is as on-field as Navia can get at a 10 to 14 second duration. Because this rotation does use 3 charges of her E, it does require 27 seconds to fully reproduce, so you can shorten the full rotation by only doing a 3E combo at the start of a fight, and then a 2E combo thereafter. This 27-second rotation does begin at the beginning of a rotation because you need to start charging up 2 E's to start. As you can see, there are different combos for different situations. It also depends on your team setup's timing, etc. Notice how her burst isn't really included in these rotations, and that's because generally I would use Navia's burst whenever it's up. She's not a stereotypical EQ user, because her E has necessary conditions to fill for greatest output, so her Q can just be standalone and used at the absolute beginning of the full team's rotation to start stacking shrapnel charges immediately. Overall, I would expect team setup with Navia to be like follows. Navia Q into your team setup, and then Navia 2 to 3 E combo, and then your other team members short on-field time, and then repeat. If there are an increased number of lower HP enemies and not just one singular bulky enemy, I found it's better not to commit a full rotation of Navia's combo, but rather use a 1E plus normal attack combo to chip the enemies down. This is a shorter 5-second damage window that doesn't need to commit your whole team's bursts and allows you to also funnel energy into characters that need it before you do a full rotation. At the end of the day, Navia's double charge E and A1 passive infusion allow extended flexibility in how long you want her to be on field. She can do small bursts of damage within 5 seconds, or commit the entirety of her kit into a 14-second window, which is in my opinion a great design that promotes flexible gameplay depending on the enemy layout. Talent priority. For sure, max out her skill, it's her main form of DPS. After that, both her burst and normal attack are still very valuable and used for her whole kit to shine. In my opinion, burst is always going to be used whenever it's available because it grants free shrapnel stacks over time. The normal attack is kind of variable depending on how much on-field you want her to be. Those of you who do generate a lot of crystallized shards from your team can skip most of the normal attack windows, but I would say that between the first and second E, you probably need to use it since you want to rush 3 to 6 stacks in 4 seconds, so you can use her second charge right after her infusion window finishes. So I would recommend both to be leveled, but slightly prioritize burst first. Overall, skill over burst equal to normal attack. Up next, Constellations, because they can sometimes affect the character's gameplay. Feel free to skip this section if you're C0 and uninterested in more. C1, Energy and Cooldown Constellation. Each stack of shrapnel consumed during her E will restore 3 energy and decrease the burst cooldown by 1 second. Each E can only restore a max of 9 energy, even if you consume more than 3 stacks, and the cooldown max decrease is by 3 seconds. The cooldown isn't really noticeable, but it's still nice to have. The energy is great, and reduces energy recharge subset requirements. C2, Crit and Utility Boost. Navia gains a built-in Marasasi Hunter 4-piece set, except it's based on her shrapnel consumed. 12% crit rate, capped at 36%, and when her E hits an opponent, a free burst shot is fired, which, if the opponent is not dead from her E already, will grant the burst benefits of 1 shrapnel stack. C3 and C5 are +3 levels to skill and burst, her most important scaling abilities. C4 is a res decrease. Whenever her burst hits an opponent, geo resistance decreased by 20%. Overall, it's a standard DPS increase constellation, but if Zhongli is on her team, it's a little less valuable because he already shreds resistance. These do stack, it's just with reduced value. C6, Crit damage and stack refund boost. If over 4 charges are consumed, every charge after the third grants 45% crit damage bonus to her E, capping at 135%. Not only that, using 4, 5, or 6 charges refunds 1, 2, or 3, reducing her charge up time by a significant amount. With C6, she can much more easily nuke enemies with faster max stack ease because you don't need as many additional crystallized shards. Overall, those of you who will consider Constellations, I'd recommend breakpoints of C2 and C6. C2 provides that massive crit rate boost and also includes C1 for the really nice energy reduction. C6 is C6 and includes everything including massive damage boost. Weapons. So with the way Navia is designed, she unironically makes pretty decent use of a claymore that honestly has never really been that great. Sacrificial Greatsword. Of course, this assumes that you have high refinement. I would say at least R4 to R5 just to have a low cooldown on its passive. The weapon itself provides a really good stat distribution that Navia can make use of, combining high basic attack of 565 alongside a middle but perfect amount of energy recharge at 30%. Using this weapon in a front-loaded Navia allows for a potential 3E instead of 2E combo that cycles on roughly an 18 to 20 second rotation. This fits very well with the cooldown of Sac Greatsword at R4, R5, and even if it doesn't proc once within a 2E combo, which is fairly unlikely at a 70 to 80% success on each attempt, it doesn't negatively impact her rotation. This reset potential provides another E usage, which offsets the lack of offensive stats from the weapon, making it a fun and decently strong choice. Besides this weapon, Navia has a decent selection of other 4-star weapons that she can use. Best in slot 4-star overall, Serpent Spine from the Battle Pass. Has a crit rate secondary stat and a conditional passive that ramps up pretty strong. Navia herself should have no issues maintaining the Serpent Spine's passive, letting her shields tank damage and protecting her own HP. Best in slot 4-star F2P will probably be the upcoming event weapon, Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword. That's stat-wise identical to Sack Greatsword, but its passive is just raw attack percent. You'll also get an extra line of attack percent if you have more exploration in Fontaine. If none of these 4 stars are options, you can always craft the Fontaine Claymore, a Tidal Shadow, for some decent stats. For 5 stars, there's a lot of options that are okay, but only some of which are great. Obviously, her signature Claymore, Verdict, is best in slot for her, but it's not much stronger than her current roster of weapons, making it a bit underwhelming compared to the usual power spike a signature weapon would usually give. That being said, the Claymore is an axe, so aesthetically, it's a dub. Bacon and Redhorn are our crit 5-star stat sticks, can't really go wrong with either one. Bacon is definitely easier to build off of, and hit a combined 100% crit rate for a good build crit ratio. Redhorn sacrifices base attack for insane crit damage, which will probably set the limit of how high Navia's crit damage can go. The attack claymores, Wolf's Gravestone, and the Unforged are decent stat sticks, but generally will perform worse than the crit weapons due to how many external and innate attack bonuses Navia will have, and fewer crit bonuses, especially at lower constellations. For my personal recommendations, I would honestly only consider the following for her build. Verdict or Serpent Spine as the best 5-star or 4-star options. Bacon and Redhorn are good crit stat stick for 5-star. Sacrificial Greatsword is great if you have R4+. Unforged is alright since you're perma-shielded, so you get the extra attack percent all the time. And the event weapon, the Overlord's Mega Magic Sword at R5 is pretty good. Artifacts. So Navia's archetype as a Geo DPS and most of her damage dealt from her elemental skill gives her limited but very strong options for her artifacts. We've got the new 4.3 artifact set Echoing Winds, which will be best in slot Navia without Farina. This set provides 18 attack percent and 20 to 50% geo damage bonus dependent on if you have a crystallized shield at the time of dealing damage. If you pair Navia with Farina, then of course 4-piece Marasasi Hunter will be best in slot, granting the freest 36% crit rate build path. Besides these 2 4-piece sets, we have other niche ones that are still usable but worse overall. 4-piece Golden Troop is great strictly for her elemental skill damage, but given that Navia will be invested for burst and normal attack talent due to her A1 passive and need to generate shrapnel stacks, her total damage will still have significant contribution from burst and normal attack, which are unaffected entirely by Golden Troop. 4-piece Petra set if you want Navia to be more supportive for your non-Geo team members. She's probably the easiest to actually use this set with her hold E since it vacuums up nearby shards. If none of these sets are applicable, run 2-piece Geo attack percent until you finish a dedicated 4-piece set. For her main stats, Navia's scaling is as simple as it gets. She uses attack, she runs crit, and geo damage bonus, etc. So if you want things easy, I would say just run attack, geo, crit mask, depending on what your build needs for the mask. If you want a little bit more details on specifics, if you run Navia with Farina, then Geo Goblet is interchangeable with Attack Goblet, being possible because Farina grants so much additional damage bonus, which is basically like the Goblet. If your Navia is C2 or above, then you get a bunch of free crit rate from her C2, which means that crit damage mask becomes better than crit rate mask for the overall build. If your Navia is C6, that means you get a massive amount of crit damage from C6, meaning that attack mask is interchangeable with the crit mask, just depends on how your stats are. So Navia's completed build will have lots of buffs depending on your team layout and usually will look something like this. We have Bennett, artifacts, and her A4 passive granting attack percent. We have C2 and C6 granting crit. And then if you pair her with Farina, you'll be getting lots of damage bonus. So if you lack in any of these departments, your artifacts should build accordingly to what you lack. If you lack Constellations, then you're always going to run a crit mask. And if you lack Farina or just don't want to run Farina with Navia, then run a Geo Goblet. Attack percent is usually the easiest stat to get, so it's the least restrictive stat to build around. Recommended stats: minimum expectations, level 90 out of 90, all level 6 talents. I'm going to showcase stat distribution with 2 different weapons with and without a full party to show how her A4 passive changes things. You'll also notice that she has really high base HP and base defense, so having 20,000 HP and 1,000 defense post artifacts is not super unusual for her. First stat page with Sacrificial Greatsword and a crit rate mask. She's hovering at a base of 2,000 attack, A4 passive gives her plus 360 for 2.4k total, and Pyro Resonance gives her additional 180 for 2.6k total. 77 crit rate, 135 crit damage, and 150% energy recharge. Changing the build to Signature Weapon Verdict and a crit damage mask, this is now her stat distribution. Base of 2.4k attack, A4 passive plus 400, Pyro Resonance plus 200 for 3,000 total. Crit rate about 70%, crit damage about 200%, and energy recharge about 120%. So the major difference between these 2 builds is the attack and the recharge. This is expected due to the different stats the 2 weapons give. Overall, I recommend achieving the following ranges: 2 to 3k attack, crit rate 70 to 90%, crit damage 150 to 250%. She has crit damage ascension stat, so it's really easy to hit 150%, and then adding a crit damage weapon can push it up to 250%. Energy recharge 120 to 160%. With this range of recharge, you'll on average have a pretty decent burst up time. Having at least one Favonius user on your team will basically guarantee Navia will have her burst up when she needs it most for shrapnel stacking. If you have 4-piece Marasasti Hunter, remember to add 36% to her crit rate, meaning she can cap at 64%, and if you have C2, it can drop by a further 36%, meaning she can cap at 28%. The possibility of these 2 increases means that if you have both, reaching 100% combined crit rate is basically guaranteed, and more often than not, you'll overcap. Team comps. So Navia is in a pretty interesting spot when it comes to her team synergies. Her gameplay is self-sustainable as long as there is an element to crystallize with, which means that she can fit in standalone team comps where there's one extra slot and the elements are reactable. Because her multipliers are nice and juicy, her damage output by herself is pretty good. But if we want to optimize and make the best team comp possible for her, that's where we come to some roadblocks. At the current moment, we don't really have the units that work perfectly with her, so instead we have to use existing strong compositions that are already great without her, even though she would be good in them, if that makes sense. So let's first describe the team setups with these things in mind. The first and probably most generic is Navia standalone. This is solo Geo Navia plus 3 flex of Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo. This is the most flexible thing that you can do, and the range of strength of possible team comps is very high. The strongest of solo Geo Navia team comps combines Farina plus the duo Pyro combo Bennett and Xiangling. This takes a version of the national team comp and puts Navia for her standalone damage. Because Navia's damage can be condensed into a small window, this gives ample time for Bennett to give a 1 heal boost to everyone on the team, including himself, for Farina's HP drain and fanfare stacks. This team is less autopilot than most and requires attention to HP management as well as Navia stacks and energy funneling for Xiangling, who will be the most energy hungry in this team. But if these conditions are met, not only do we get impressive Navia numbers, but also forward vaporized numbers from Farina and generally strong damage from Xiangling. From here, we move on to the most common team comps around Navia, Double Geo Navia plus 2 Flex. Double Geo is incredibly powerful because it enables everything that Geo would want. The Resonance provides 15% shield strength, and while under a shield, 15% additional damage bonus and minus 20% Geo res to enemies that are hit. And the existence of another Geo character usually means increased Geo particle generation and more potential crystallized shard generation. So let's go through the Geo characters we have and their pairing strength with Navia. Zhongli. Great synergy, but you do need to place his Geo constructs in places where they won't get destroyed by boss hitboxes. This is an often overlooked issue, but it's very apparent when the Geo particle generation is tied to the constructs dealing damage. With Zhongli's shield, you gain additional minus 20% universal resistance reduction, which includes Geo. Albedo, okay synergy, but he is primarily defense scaling, which means he won't benefit from the same buffs that would be applied to Navia. However, he does have decent AoE coverage, his burst is kind of a waste of time in my opinion, and he has good Geo particle generation. Noelle, great synergy, but requires a specific team comp to make the most value. Expect to run Farina plus Yelan or Xingqiu alongside Navia for proper damage output and team synergy. If you are lacking Farina in your team roster, Noelle plus Navia combo drops in value tremendously, and I would not really recommend you run it. In this particular comp, Navia does not need to be on field since Noelle can generate the crystallized shards herself. So Navia becomes a quick swap character to use her E and then swap off and wait for stacks again. Ningguang, great synergy if you can make it work. Both Navia and Ningguang have small windows where they can deal massive amounts of damage, Ningguang with her C6 burst combo and Navia with her double E. Both of them are attack scaling and funnel energy into each other for mutual gains. Goro would only recommend using at Constellation 6. This is because the buffs that he provides are useless to Navia unless there's 3 Geo on the team for 15% Geo damage bonus. But this cuts Navia's A4 passive by 1 character, losing 20% attack. So to offset this, Goro's Constellation 6 can provide Geo crit damage corresponding to the number of Geo teammates. If you're running 3 Geo plus 1 flex, Navia will gain 40 crit damage, 15 Geo damage bonus, and 20% attack. If running 2 Geo and 2 Flex, Navia gains 20 crit damage plus 15 Geo damage and 40% attack. If you're not C6 Goro, I wouldn't recommend using Goro at all. While he does absorb shards automatically, it's not worth over the damage loss. And finally, the last 2 Geo units, Itto and Yunjin, both do not have any particular synergy with Navia. Itto is best as a defense scaling mono Geo hyper carry with Goro, Albedo, and other supports. Yunjin benefits normal attack spammers, and only a small portion of Navia's damage comes from that. So using this double Geo template, you can expect the best results from the following teams. Navia Hot Rock. This is Zhongli plus Xiangling plus Bennett. This team comp maximizes raw damage for Navia and Xiangling. Bennett buffs them both. Zhongli's shield shreds both pyro and geo resistance, and double geo and double pyro resonance grant the strongest bonuses to both Navia and Xiangling. Everyone on the team benefits from Bennett's attack boost as well. Navia Wet Rock. This is Noelle plus Farina plus Yelan or Xingqiu. This is the Noelle Navia combo composition that uses both Farina and Noelle and Yelan's damage ramp passive to benefit both Noelle's on-field damage and Navia's quick swap E. Hypercarry Navia. Zhongli plus Farina plus Bennett. These are the greatest buffs that can be provided to Navia without losing core synergies. Double Geo Resonance, Farina's damage bonus, Bennett's attack boost. Bennett is the solo healer and his burst can soft heal Zhongli or Farina just enough to drain HP for fanfare and her summons. Honorable mention if you have the units to pull it off, Navia plus Farina plus Yelan plus Jean. While Jean and Navia have no inherent synergy, Jean guarantees Farina's damage bonus caps almost immediately and also boosts Farina and Yelan's Hydro damage with Virtus and Venerer. This composition scales the stronger your Hydro units are. You may have noticed that in all of this team comp discussion, we use mostly Hydro and Pyro units. The main culprit here is because Bennett is the strongest buff support for Navia, and with Bennett, you can expect Xiangling to be there. Xiangling also provides ICD ignoring Pyro application on her burst, which is necessary for consistent crystallizes. And because Pyro has such a strong synergy, Hydro is obviously the next step, having the most off-field autopilot supports that benefit whoever's on field. It's really just the best of both worlds. So, while Electro characters can synergize with Navia teams, I find that taking those characters away from their Dendro-oriented team comps aggravate in Hyperbloom to be less than ideal. The exception to this may be Fischl, whose A4 passive can apply Electro fairly well and is mostly off-field, and Yaimiko, who is super similar to Fischl in this regard and also falls in the same category. Cryo units have pretty poor synergy overall, since either they need dedicated team comps for reverse melt, or they're running freeze, and Geo plus freeze does not work very well. So in general, I think that these Navia team comps are the best choices that we have currently, although they are far from perfect. In my opinion, I think Navia team comps in the future may continue to get stronger with the release of better synergy characters. And that should cover an extensive amount of information to guide you and your Navia to great success. I think that Navia is an excellently designed character, utilizing a basically dead crystallized reaction into something meaningful and very powerful with Navia's multipliers. With a well thought out kit, she works very well standalone, which is very rare for a Geo character, and is also insanely fun with the sound design and her overall appeal. If you guys enjoyed the video and hopefully learned something, I'd appreciate if you liked the video and maybe shared it with your friends and fellow Navia owners so they can master her kit. As always, thank you guys for watching, good luck on getting Navia, and we'll see you next time. Take care.